Well, I hope everybody's had an exhilarating afternoon at our workshops and sessions. I know some of it was contentious, other parts of it were exciting, and other parts of it were actually educational and informative, and I hope everybody not just enjoyed themselves but learned something. Our final presenter today is someone who I think is an extraordinary educator and has been instrumental in transforming New York City's public school system. Her name is Michelle Cahill, and I'm sure many of you know her. She's Vice President for National Programs at the Carnegie Corporation and spent the first 4 years of the Bloomberg administration inside the Tweed Courthouse, which is our Department of Education, moving the New York City public school system in a direction that I think it thought it never could go into. Small schools, particularly in high schools, focusing on a model that really reflected the learning needs of the students in that school, and also the will and the wishes of teachers and principals. It's really just a great pleasure to welcome Michelle Cahill and have her here to wrap up for us today. She's a very special person, and I know you'll find this a wonderful session. Thank you, Michelle.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's quite an honor to speak to people from so many, not only from so many countries, but who are leading the kinds of reforms that are needed for all of our young people around the globe. As we have such a rapidly changing societies. I've been asked to synthesize what went on today, so all of you get to be the critics. Is this actually what did go on today? And so we'll take some questions afterwards or comments as well. So I tried to organize today what I heard today, what I had some wonderful others, people going around and listening heard, into some themes. So let me start with this major theme that kicked us off this morning, which is about globalization and urbanization, and understanding education within the context of a rapidly changing world. So what are those changes that have come up in our conversations today? Well, very early on and throughout the day, changes in the economy, demands for higher levels of literacy and mathematics, but defined through what that looks like in the real world and the world of what's needed to succeed in the new economies. Critical thinking skills, problem solving, higher levels of communications across groups differently from oneself, creativity and learning to learn, the ability to continuously learn. New higher skills, the ones I was just talking about, are now the currency of individual social mobility in numerous countries, as well as of economic competitiveness of the country itself. And the critical lever of human capital in all the countries, but in some countries more pronounced. That is, in our rapidly changing world, human capital may outstrip the importance of certain kinds of other natural resources. So the whole notion of how important our talent is to this, to economic competitiveness, but also to individual mobility. Changes in the mobility of people and challenges to the fabric of society. I think a number of the speakers this morning talked about the rural-urban migration, how we're moving to perhaps be 75% urban by 2050. It's happening all over the globe, and we have massive migrations of people. Now, what I was hearing is that we've had changes in, no one exactly said this, but it's the free flow of capital, the notion of the vastly changing economies. But we also are having people voting in a certain way with their feet to move to where there will be opportunity, given that that's happening, and that's happening intra-country in the sense of rural-urban. It's also happening among countries. So our countries are having more challenges from diversity of population, but also populations who have to be rapidly brought to higher levels of achievement. This has led to another key focus that has been throughout the day, which is education for participation in more complex society. That is, with the ethical and moral dimensions, and for social cohesion and stability. So a couple of examples of both of the way I've heard people raising those issues. From the U.S., Joel Klein said, there's a danger in the U.S. of an entrepreneurial class and an underclass. Mr. Yin from China, rural-urban disparities growing, but they're also interconnected in the challenges and the solutions. In Finland, high-performing country, but concerned with the next wave, greater creativity, integration of social ethos with high levels of academic competency. China, real challenges of excellence and equity at the same time, and moving rapidly in two dimensions of school systems. Brazil, rapid need for acceleration for large numbers of children who are just beginning to even be in the elementary level of schooling and then secondary, but real changes in raising the issue of social identity, that there are competing identities, sometimes from very well organized, like drug cartels, and how do you engage for social cohesion, the other kinds of identities. And we also heard that from Toronto in the disengagement of populations of students who've been marginalized, in that instance, minority boys in particular. So I think we came off with a huge challenge. Not that we all didn't know that, but that it's a somewhat different challenge depending upon the country, though more similarities in the group that's here. In some countries, we have mature systems that have high spending and lower mediocre results on changing student outcomes. And these are very often systems that are very difficult to change because they've been so matured. But in other countries, requiring expansion of access as well as change. All throughout, everyone talking about the challenge of innovation. So what were the what were the challenges named? And then I'm going to get to what you've all talked about as the solutions. Low expectations by schools and society of children, parents, and community with rural, migrant, or poor low-income status students have attitudinal problems in the people in schools, not everyone, but the particularly Madam Agarwal speaking about the attitudinal problems across a whole system of schools that have been going on for many years for very low-income children, in which there's not a belief that this can change or that they can do this. We certainly have seen that in the New York City reform, in which we had, when we closed in the early years, 23 of our lowest performing high schools, really no proof points, no yet belief that those students could rise to higher levels of standards. Also belief about how effective a school can be. Can schools be effective against these big social problems, or do the social problems have to be solved first? And the notion that we need to change that. Little or no accountability for progress. Schools and families disconnected from one another. Parents viewed as deficits rather than assets to their children's education, and no accountability or transparency to parents by the schools, but also no demands made on parents to participate or be accountable for what's under their control. Factory models of school organization, school system organization, industrial era bureaucracies, and also unions. Thwart ability to design and execute on key reforms. Mixed ability among the countries to draw teachers with the strongest talent. Draw from the strongest talent of young students to teaching, and also deploy those teachers to the highest need schools. And in some countries, low wages and status for teachers. Education systems, the United States especially, having a hard time using technology well for innovation. That is, we're spending a lot of money on something, but we haven't mixed our design and our understanding of what's needed with the resource at hand. In all the presentations, we've heard about the importance of boldness, vision with a clear purpose, innovation and attention to execution on strategies, and learning from experiments. Different countries and cities were leading with different levers of change, but much commonality, I think we've heard, across the global cities. The most prominent commonality: bold action, strong leadership, emphasis on solving problems never solved before, and being accountable for getting results. Specifically, we had numbers of comments today about getting graduation gains that are also measured by the validation from the next level of schooling or by employers, student learning gains, and equity and excellence at the same time. The key reforms that I heard everyone speaking about today, and I'm sure this isn't as comprehensive as it needs to be, or maybe expressed exactly the way you're thinking about it, but it's what I heard. Focus on high expectations, defined as connected to the new economic demands of a rapidly changing world and citizenship demands. New definitions of community schooling, new definitions of what the social contract is or needs to be between communities, stakeholders, families, schools. In particular, hearing about new kinds of demands on New Delhi, new strategies for partnering with parents, transparent, all the way from very high-level interaction strategies directly with parents, to system strategies of making data apparent, or grading schools so parents can see, as New York City is doing, what that means. It's trying to get more transparency, but a different relationship with parents, different relationship with businesses, with higher education. We talked a lot about different kinds of partnerships, and what I sort of hear as a kind of more porousness of school knowing what it has to be and be accountable, but a little more open to other assets and building social capital. A strong focus on what Joel calls the system of good schools, and what various people spoke about as identifying every school as having to be functional, right? And we talked about that with Brazil and Rio with the 150 schools, and treating schools differently, that sort of notion of a portfolio of schools. Some will need other different strategies, though all with the same internationally competitive standards. A strong focus on human capital, highly capable principals, the ability to recruit, develop, and differentially reward good teachers and school teams. Focus on teaching and learning, the relationship between teacher, student, and material, with active roles in creating. We heard this from almost everyone, but it was very strong from Jerusalem, Finland. We heard it in the New York City on the critical, I'm sorry, I've lost, the teams. Inquiry teams, the critical inquiry teams, the notion that it's a dynamic, and that I think also added to the conversation was the dynamic of the tools that can help that, technology-based tools. Importance of the tools that include new ways of understanding how you would tell whether you're getting to these higher levels of critical thinking skills and problem solving, and the problem in many countries that has to be addressed of low quality assessments. So getting to higher quality assessments that are actually assessing competencies, assessing mastery, assessing performance capability was a theme in a number of the critical importance of engaging students, cognizant of the competing identities. I said this as the problem, but I think we had some really interesting solutions there that have not come up in many other conferences I've been at, which is thinking about identity as also directly connected with the academic work that students are doing. This morning, the notion of both STEM and STEAM, that to engage the most disconnected students, the students furthest away from the kind of achievement that we're looking for, was not to go to remediation, was to go to higher demand, more engaging kinds of curriculum and teaching, whether that's in science and technology or science, technology, and arts, and also innovating to see what could bubble up from schools in that. Many places talking about personalized learning and the innovation that goes along with figuring out new roles for teachers and students, different modalities of learning and as competency-based. And Joel recognized also, Joel Klein, the notion that there's policy in countries that have to be adjusted for that, whether that's what he was referring to as seat time or others, hours, anytime, anywhere, learning how one might think about that. Just a couple of more. A lot of themes about embedding professional learning in schools. That is, building teacher capacity both through the assessments they get, but also through technology, but also through master teachers, other levels in which actual practice changes at the school level rather than people are going somewhere else too. So again, that's the porousness, bringing things in, having them being used at school. Financing differently. Less bureaucracy, more money under the control of schools to spur creative solutions, use of incentives, and also assessing this. Are these working? How do the incentives work? How do they not work? In what circumstances? Which I think of as a continuous improvement loop that a number of cities and countries were talking about. And finally, two final points. One, the critical importance of scale. We have a lot of big cities who are here, really, really huge cities that are here. And we didn't hear that they're doing this project here or project there, but rather we're doing this with 150 schools. We're doing this with 250 schools. We're doing this with 1,000 teachers. We're connecting with hundreds of rural and urban schools across this, or we're doing this for our system of 350 schools. We're going to do this with this kind of technology. And the notion, which wasn't very developed, but I think is very much, and people might want to talk about in the next couple of days, which is how do you get to that scale? Do you get to that scale? There have been some conversations during the day at lunch and others. Do you get to that scale by replication? Do you get to that scale by designing for scale? At the beginning, those kinds of issues were there. And the final thing, and it's really to salute everyone who's here, which is managing controversy and building support to counter adult action, and the critical importance of leadership that we just heard demonstrated for us from so many of the speakers today in what they have been prepared to risk for themselves and in their systems to actually drive toward the kinds of academic learning and achievement that our students need in order for them to have bright futures and for us to have coherent, cohesive societies that can bring us to solve our global problems. Thank you. We have a little time for questions, so we're not going to leave for approximately 10 minutes. So, sure. Does anybody have questions or comments?
Don't get shy now.
No, come on. Anything you disagree with, you want to add? There must be something someone wants to add to this.
I'll ask a question.
Good.
Does this work? I want to ask you a question about the last point you made, because I think it's very critical and probably critical to everybody in this room. We invited to this conference people who are working in government, in many large public education systems, and doing extraordinary work. But I emphasize they are working in government. And I'm wondering if you could comment on your own experience, because Michelle spent 4 years working...
4.5.
4.5. Yeah, not that she's counting or anything like that. New York City government. On this question of bringing innovation to scale? Because we know foundations out there fund little, now you're at a foundation and we love you and we love foundations, but they tend to fund little boutique projects out there. And then this question of how do you bring it to scale, how did you do that in New York City? Because you did.
Right, and we did it with some help from foundations who took some risks. I was in government then. Well, first of all, we had to have an incredible commitment at the mayoral level and the chancellor level to do that, right? And to actually do it consciously. When Joel Klein first spoke to me, we didn't know each other, and he actually just emailed me the day that he was announced, because somebody had told him to, and asked me what he should do, who he should think about, and I said, this is a great opportunity, so I wrote him everything he should do. And he was interested enough to keep the conversation, but one of the things, that's why I'm telling this story, is that he asked me to drive innovation. So it's a consciousness about that you really need to break up mature systems and consciously drive innovation. The second thing is we needed to have a blueprint of what we thought were high leverage areas of change, right? And it could be different, and Sir Michael Barber talks about this a lot. Those things may change over time when you're trying to go from awful to adequate and from adequate to excellent or great or outstanding. So there may be some things that need to be done. And we heard it today, I think from Rio, the notion of putting in a curriculum, right? It's not that you don't want innovation and things to be coming from everywhere, but if there's nothing there that is connected to standards, you might do something like that first. But that's a scale issue. That's a scale that essentially says, we have a first world and a third world system here or something, and we need to bring everybody to this level because that's a basis in which they could innovate off of. But also, where is there an area of the system that cannot be improved, that has to be ended and invented, right? And that's where I think you need to design for scale. So we didn't design for, using the example, people call it small schools, but it was essentially to use the design characteristics of effective schools and what we know about resiliency of young people in high-risk environments, and that they needed to get, and accountability, a cohort of teachers and principal accountable for a cohort of young people, and they would do whatever needed to happen for those students, right? So, and to try to make it manageable in some way, but not as an experiment or a pilot to do 10 schools. You said from the beginning, we're going to do, from October of 2002, we're going to do 200 new small schools. We've done more of those. We're going to hold ourselves accountable. But you could not execute on that without changing the district. You had to change, because underneath that, I mean, small schools sounds like we just made things small. We actually changed how you hired principals, where they came from, that we did personnel committees at each of the schools to hire at the school level, bringing in talent from one part of the city that was more advantaged to other parts of the city. We needed to completely change the way the system did that. So for the first time in New York City, at least recent history that anybody knew about, we ran cross-functional teams and executed on cross-functional teams, meeting 3 times a week at 7 o'clock in the morning, working backwards from the September that we were going to open all of these, and holding everyone accountable in the system for their part of it. So it's, and then getting lots of help from external partners for the new design. Okay. Did anybody hear something that they were surprised by today? Or, you know, more curious about, either because I captured it or you heard it in a different way? Something that was new or surprising or made you think about your own reform or thinking things somewhat differently? Yes, sir.
You know, when...
And you're from Rio, right?
Yeah, I'm from Rio. When something that keeps, you know, I think there is a discussion there that we talk so much about innovation and everybody's so driven by innovation, but I forgot his name from Finland.
Yes.
When he answered, oh, perhaps we get here because we don't change very much.
Yes, it was
That stuck to me because, you know, well, perhaps we're always looking for innovation and we're trying so many different things. And, you know, that if we just stuck to things that were proven to work and, looked for innovation, but just were not so driven, perhaps we could achieve. I don't know, it was just completely different from what I thought before, and I kept on thinking about it during the day.
Yeah. Does anyone else have a comment on that besides me? Go ahead.
From Buenos Aires, I was thinking exactly what he said. It was for me very surprising how humble Finland has been in telling us what they told us. And I think David was talking in the last panel about globalization or internalization of the education. And I think it's great for countries like mine to keep always before us, behind us, looking forward. But also I think we have to make a tremendous exercise in always looking where we live and how our students are and what are our pupils. And keep on trying always the best practices and the best policies, but never forgetting that we are from where we are and what our students need.
That's great. What I was thinking about him, and I should have brought that up. I think it's knowing when something's working, and what's broken, and what you need to fix, what's a fad or what's a promising innovation, right? So lots of people ask me, why weren't we putting more resources fairly across all the high schools in the system? And what I said is, in scarce situations, it's like, well, do you want to make all high schools small schools? No. If these schools are doing well, if these schools, they may need an entirely different approach. They may still need to think about whether technology could bring their students to another level, but they don't need to either do the same innovation or they don't need to, we don't need to get focused on right? Like technology for everybody or small for everyone. But the notion of, which is very hard in education, of analyzing and segmenting the problems and the solutions while keeping equity as a part of it, I think that's a very good reminder. And the reminder that we do it always in a cultural context, and that the analytic processes are probably more transferable than exactly the same innovation that we can use in different ways. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I don't know how you did that. That was amazing. Thank you, everybody. It's time to get on the bus. Don't forget to get on the bus. We're going to Gracie Mansion for dinner and to hear Jeff Canada, and hopefully for a continuation of our conversation. Thank you all for a spectacular day, and also we hope to see everybody in the morning at City Hall, including all of our New York City delegates. We hope you come to hear the last panel at City Hall and for breakfast. Thank you.